Today we're going to look at another mentor text, this time from the New York Times, and we're going to look at this specifically thinking about how we root our own explanatory informational piece in the kind of discourse that comes before, how to organize it. So a couple of words about context before we get started. The context here, New York Times, publication, well-known. We can say all kinds of things about the author of the New York Times, who reads that publication, and the author here, in this case, Galen Strawson, you might not know that name, you probably don't know that name, is a professor of philosophy and an author. In terms of context, it's important to recognize that this piece that we're going to look at is written for a general audience. So he's not writing for people in academia, but for readers of the New York Times. Now, organization, just to mention, this piece is about 1,500 words, and that's the length of the chapter that you're currently writing. So you can look to this mentor text for ideas about how to paragraph your piece, and we're going to look at that structure together. As I said, we're paying most careful attention to the ways that the writer roots their own thinking in the discourse that comes before. And ultimately, we're going to come to this sort of essential understanding, enduring understanding, which is that writing explanatory informational text is a matter of selecting, organizing, and curating for your reader. This means you need to anticipate what your reader knows, what they will find interesting, and how much explanation is necessary and how much explanation is too much. Ultimately, it's a question of art, language arts. It's the art of writing well. All right, so let's jump into the piece. And this piece is linked in the task sheet, just so you know. So we'll start with the first paragraph, right? Every day, it seems some verifiably intelligent person tells us that we don't know what consciousness is. The nature of consciousness, they say, is an awesome mystery. I can't help but point out, they say, is an awesome mystery. It's the ultimate hard problem. The current Wikipedia entry is typical. Consciousness is the most mysterious aspect of our lives. Philosophers have struggled to comprehend the nature of consciousness. So in terms of my outline, consciousness here, it seems like the writer starts with consciousness in the everyday idiom, how people use this term, what they say, and the they is sort of how people talk about this big idea in real life. In a way, we're starting with kind of the least common denominator, and that's kind of exemplified by this quote from Wikipedia. Paragraph 2, I find this odd. Now, of all you can take away from paragraph 2, I want you to just stick with that really first phrase, because that's where we get into the I say, right? I find this odd because we started with the they say, paragraph 1, and we moved to the I say in paragraph 2. I find this odd because we know exactly what consciousness is. We're by consciousness. But really what I want you to note is paragraph 1, they say. Paragraph 2, I say. You can look more closely at this later, but let's go ahead to paragraph 3 now. The nature of physical stuff, by contrast, is deeply mysterious, and physics has grown stranger by the hour. Now, as a reader, I'm wondering, why is he talking about physics here? Richard Feynman's remark about quantum theory, there he selected something, and we have a they say, a specific they say here, which is this fella, Richard Feynman. I don't know who that is. I think I can safely say that nobody understands quantum mechanics, seems as true as ever. Or rather more carefully, the nature of physical stuff is mysterious, except insofar as consciousness is a form of physical stuff. Now, as a reader, I'm taking note of the fact that this is the first phrase we've seen that's in italics. At this point in the paragraph, I'm feeling this is pretty deep. It's a bit abstract, and I'm not really sure what's happening here. I don't know much about quantum theory, but I can tell you one thing that the writer is doing. What's clear that the writer has made a connection. Now, as writers and thinkers, that's something we do every day in language and literature, is make connections. But it's really hard to do it well, to know when the connection takes us further and when it's sort of outside of the point. So let's try to understand, how is this writer making a connection? Well, we know he's connecting to quantum theory, right? He moves us from consciousness to quantum theory. These are both really big ideas that most people probably don't understand. I'm wondering why he does that, as I told you. But it's the italics bit, right, where we see that the writer justifies that connection, right? Why is he connecting to quantum theory? Because consciousness, he says, is itself a form of physical stuff. Now, do I understand what that means? Not really. I'm trying to. I'm thinking about it with an open mind, but do I understand it? And the writer here, I think he knows that I'm not going to fully understand that. And so he does provide a little bit of explanation as we move on in that paragraph. And this is the main thing. If that's over your head, it's okay. It's over my head too. This point, which is at first extremely startling, was well put by Bertrand Russell in the 1950s essay, Mind and Matter. So here we are. The main thing that we're looking for, we're back to I'm going to move this, see if I can move this up here. That's better. We're back to a they say, right? And in this case, the they say is a very specific they. It's Bertrand Russell in the 1950s. Now, I don't know if you know Bertrand Russell. He's a really influential philosopher. I don't know much about him, but I know his name. His name kind of rings out. So that's why this piece that's recent is reaching back all the way to the 1950s to root itself in a kind of discourse, because Bertrand Russell's ideas are influential. So in this case, paragraph 1, they say, paragraph 2, I say, paragraph 3, they say, but the they say comes sort of towards the end, the middle of the paragraph when we come to the actual they say. Let's go beyond that for now. Next paragraph, that's paragraph, is it 5, I think? 4, rather. I think Russell is right. Now, we always use last names when we're talking about thinkers, philosophers, people that are not our friends. So it's not, I think Bertrand is right. It's, I think Russell is right. And that sentence is so simple. It could be written by an elementary school student, but ultimately that brings us back to the I say, right? And these paragraphs 3 and 4 especially are very abstract. But again, I want to keep you focused on the structure, how the writer paragraphs, structures, organizes their explanatory work. And we come back in paragraph 5 to I say. I think Russell is right. Human conscious experience is wholly a matter of physical goings on in the body and in particular in the brain. But why does he say that we know nothing about the intrinsic quality of physical events except when there are mental events we directly experience? Isn't he exaggerating? So again, it's very abstract, but these question marks are kind of jumping out at me. Why is the writer here giving us question marks? Now, with they say, I say, it's important you know, it's not simply a matter of agreeing or disagreeing, right? If we borrow the IB definitions of the command terms, what you want to do is examine and discuss the details that you found in your research. So here, examine, consider an idea in a way that uncovers the assumptions and interrelationships or connections of the issues. And ultimately, in your paragraphs, in your writing, you're going to discuss, right? Which means not to talk about it with a friend, right? This is a more of an academic definition of discuss, to offer a considered and balanced review that includes a range of arguments, factors, hypotheses, opinions, or conclusions should be presented clearly and supported by appropriate evidence. So he starts the paragraph with something simple. I think Russell is right. But he goes on to examine and discuss that idea. And he does that through inquiring, through questioning. Isn't he exaggerating? And notice that this is a form, isn't he exaggerating? This is a form of I say, right? Because he's ultimately, the writer here is thinking about Bertrand Russell's idea, and that's happening obviously in the context of his own brain. I don't think so, and I'll try to explain. Again, I say, explanation, right? This is what we're working with here. First, though, I need to try to reply to those, they're probably philosophers, who doubt that we really know what consciousness is. Now, here something really subtle has happened, something really sophisticated has happened. This piece is rooted in discourse. That's what you are asked to do for the writing that you're working on right now. And it's in those phrases right now that we see that. First, though, I need to try to reply, right? Reply, this piece in the New York Times is a response. It is a form of I say, right, to the scholarship that already exists, which is the they say. Now, the scholarship that already exists, that includes philosophers, that includes Bertrand Russell, that includes the they say that comes before the piece, right? First, though, I need to try to reply to those who doubt that we really know what consciousness is, or that what conscious experience is. This ultimately enables the writer to establish a purpose for their piece. And that is maybe one of the most difficult things about what you're asked to do right now. We've been calling it an angle. What's your angle on the topic? Obviously, you want your writing to really stand out, to be compelling, to grab the reader and keep their attention as they're reading your piece that you're producing for this book that we're writing together. Okay, so the reply is simple. I love, again, some of the sentences in this piece, for as abstract as it gets. Some of these sentences could be written by elementary school students, and you should do that too. We want some combination. As we're respecting our reader, we're expecting a lot from them, but we don't want to overtire them, overtax them, right? If you read this and every paragraph is like those 2 paragraphs we just saw, which are so abstract, you're just going to click away, right? You're not going to stay with it. The reply is simple. We know what conscious experience is because the having is the knowing, right? Now, here we are back to an I say. He says the reply is simple, and what he means, what he's implying is my reply, right? I would reply. So there's no literal I there, and that's a question and choice for you. You can think about, we've talked about this already, how much you use the first person pronoun, if you even use the first person pronoun. And you notice you can do it without using the word I, and that's what the writer has done right here. The reply is simple, meaning my reply is simple. That's the I say. And we're going to move on from there, paragraph 5, down to paragraph 6. Yes, but what is it? At this point, philosophers like to give examples. We're back to a they say. He anticipates the objections of the reader, and not only the reader of the New York Times in the moment, I think this piece was published in 2016, but also the previous scholarship, right? What philosophers have said and written before. Yes, but what is it? He anticipates, he puts the reader in the center, what they know and what they need and what they might think in response to the originality of his claims and his ideas. So we've gone back between paragraph 4 and 5, between the I say and the they say in paragraph. Sorry, they say in paragraph 6, from paragraph 5 to paragraph 6. Paragraph 7. So we all know what consciousness is. Okay, do we? Okay. Now here in this paragraph, what I want you to note is that he essentially moves us to what questions this raises, right? That is the so what. And that is what we've been talking about, being an inquirer. What questions does this raise? So what? Why are you telling us about Bertrand Russell? Why are you making the connection to quantum theory, whatever? So we all know what consciousness is. Once we're clear on this, we can try to go further. For consciousness does, of course, raise a hard problem. What questions does this raise? So what? The problem arises from the fact that we accept that consciousness is wholly a matter of physical goings-on, but can't see how this can be so. Again, that gets to some very abstract things that a professor of philosophy wrote. You're going to do this for what's appropriate to you as a high school student, but you really do want to, as this writer does, identify what questions that your discussion, that your selection and organization of details, and your discussion, examination of those details, what question does that raise? So what? That's kind of where we are. This is the last paragraph we're going to look at together, and then you can continue this work with this mentor text. But we see once we come to paragraph, 7, the German philosopher, don't know how to say that, Leibniz, made the point vividly in 1714. Now, this is really rooting it in discourse, right? We have 1950s all the way back to the beginning of the 18th century. But this is a very clear example, once again, of they say, right? And the they here is some German philosopher, which I don't actually know. So continue with this piece, looking at how the writer organized it. Even if some of the ideas of consciousness and quantum theory are a little abstract, pay attention to the paragraphing itself, because that's what you can kind of steal like an artist from a piece like this. This is a really vivid and good example of how to root your own piece in research, how to root it in the discourse, how to select details and organize those details as a writer.